Great rewards don't wait, so why should you? Through the Invigor Book and Buy Grower program, you could earn a $30 per bag rebate when you book all of your Invigor hybrid canola by November 14th. Talk to your retailer. Terms and conditions apply.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 at Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Wednesday midweek edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday indeed. Also, hey, big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast as well. And if you're listening to the podcast version of the show, even if you're listening on Rural Radio 147, download the podcast version because we're going to do some news at the back end of the show here today, just like we did yesterday. Some big stuff happening in the world of ag. We can't fit into the main show, but we'll get to the news segment today for sure. Okay, today on the program. Now, one of the big things I have heard a lot from the real agriculture audience in Canada and the U.S. is concerns about fertilizer prices. Well, today we're going to talk to the guy that knows more about the fertilizer markets than maybe anybody else I know. That is Josh Linville of StoneX. He is going to join us and try to break it down. Why are these prices so sticky, and what can we expect from an input price perspective on this 26 crop? We're still trying to get 25 off. We got to think about 26. We got to walk and chew gum at the same time. We'll also be joined by Darcy Pawlik. He is the executive director with the Wheat Growers Association, and we're going to chat with Darcy about their push. The wheat growers are really pushing here. We need to be focused on infrastructure. Now, there's trade infrastructure. Also, the regulatory environment fits into that. We just got to make Canada an easier, better, more attractive place to do business and be competitive on the global stage. And Darcy has some thoughts on that. We'll also be joined by John Newton. He is the executive head at Terrain. Love chatting with John about what's going on in the world of agriculture and how policy decisions and policy impacts definitely impact things at the farm gate. And we see a lot of negativity when we look at the margins on the 25 crop, the 24 crop in the U.S., and as we forecast ahead to 26, it is ugly. It is ugly. And there's a lot of talk about ad hoc programming to really top up and provide some cash flow for U.S. farmers as President Trump tries to work out some of these trade deals. We'll see what happens here, because the farmer definitely has some loss concerns, and I'm sure the banks are getting more and more concerned as well, wanting stuff to improve. And we'll also have time today for your feedback as well. Now, if you have feedback, I want to hear from you. You just got to send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or of course, call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, let's bring in Josh Linville from StoneX. We're talking fertilizer markets right after this.
Ever hear that good things come to those who wait? Well, we think it's more like great rewards come to those who book their Invigor hybrid canola early. Through the Invigor Book and Buy Grower program, you could earn a $30 per bag rebate when you book all your Invigor needs by November 14th. Speak with your local retailer about eligible hybrids. Terms and conditions apply. Book early. Come out ahead.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
I'm Lindsay Smith, host of The Agronomist, and I want to thank you for tuning in for over 200 episodes of our beloved little program. Join me Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern on YouTube for our live and interactive agronomy Q&A. Each week, our guest panel will handle some of your toughest agronomic questions live, streaming on YouTube, Facebook, X, and RealAgriculture.com. Tune in Monday nights or go to realagriculture.com/agronomist and sign up for our email notifications and don't miss an episode.
If I had $1 for every time a farmer in my speeches or feedback to this show says, input prices, they're too high, they're sticky, why are they not going down like the commodity markets have? I would be a very rich man. Here to break down why those prices are so sticky and not moving in the direction that maybe all of us would like to see, it is Josh Linville of StoneX. How are we doing today, Josh?
We're doing all right. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Everywhere I go, farmers are like, man, I really think the price of my inputs are really cheap. I wonder if they would actually accept more money from me to pay for this fertilizer.
I can remember I was in Pasco, Washington last January, and I was talking about, nitrogen prices, and I had some local prices from USDA. And then, and what's interesting is that you would say, like, well, what should prices be? Lower. Okay, what price would nitrogen get to and you would be happy? Lower. Like, it could go to, it could be $5 and people would still be, come on. Hey, if only we could go back to those 2020 and 21 prices. So, Josh, give me the lowdown here. We can start with nitrogen. What's at work here? A lot of people thinking about their 26 plans. Some probably have already purchased potentially. Some thinking about it here in the fall. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, unfortunately, there are a few things around the world that are improving slightly. We're seeing a little bit of improvement on Chinese urea exports, which, hey, they're 10% of the global marketplace in terms of exports. So that's a major step forward. We've not seen anything major happen around the world to restrict production, which is kind of what's driven us to where we are today. But unfortunately, man, there's still a lot of problems out there. European producers are still 75% normal. That's removing millions of tons of nitrogen per year. We still have all the production hiccups we've had in 2025. It's not like we have excess production around the world to make up that difference really, really short time. The thing that scared me the most, though, there is hope and there's fear in the Russia-Ukraine peace talks. Some people may not be aware. Russia remains our biggest single supplier of urea and UAN. We spend a lot of time, talking about, we're not doing business with Russia, the heck with Russia, all these other things. They're our biggest single supplier of a lot of the nitrogen out there. And if we all of a sudden wake up one morning and Trump puts on massive tariffs, we're in trouble and looking for alternatives in a world that doesn't have a lot of alternatives.
There'd be a lot of push for an exemption there.
I think so. Now, whether or not they would get it, that becomes a whole other issue that's probably well outside of most people's pay grades.
Yeah, so I know in the past you've done a lot of the ratios on the price of N and the price of corn. Where do those ratios shake out right now?
Right now, urea is on the higher end. I would say for this time of year, it's probably the third or fourth worst that we've ever seen. When you look at UAN, it is the worst we've ever seen. Anhydrous, surprisingly enough, it's on the high side of what we would consider that normal range, but it's at least still connected. It's still within range of it. And really, when you look at the price of anhydrous versus corn, you look at it versus urea, look at it versus UAN, look at it just on price per pound of actual N, this could be a big fall run. Farmers are going to be looking for whatever route forward that's the cheapest. Anhydrous is one of those routes.
But if you don't have the equipment, you're not set up to do it, then you're looking for a custom applicator to be doing it for you.
Absolutely. And those guys that do have the equipment to do it, they're probably not taking time off. It's going to be one of those situations where as soon as you start, if there's an open window, that tractor doesn't turn off.
Yeah. Phosphorus, ugly.
And unfortunately, not a lot of short-term help. A lot of people sitting there.
What's going on?
It comes back to the world again, right? Everything always comes back to the world view. China's typically your world's largest exporter. They usually export between 8 to 10 million ton per year. Right now, estimates are they'll only export 4 to 4.5 million ton this year. And you got to remember, the phosphate world, 5 countries control 85-90% of global production and global exports. And your leader of that group is less than half of what they would normally do. Again, it's just not the extra production out there to make up the difference. And then we're shooting ourselves in the foot. We've got tariffs and or duties against every major manufacturer out there as far as countries go. And our own production has been suffering since spring of 21. Q4, Q1, we set the lowest operating rates that we've ever seen at 58%. Q2 was a meager 61%. And so everybody's talking, demand destruction, the price is too high. And usually when we start to threaten these things, we see the price goes down. Unfortunately, man, this year, the market is basically saying, I need demand destruction to rebalance the S&D because we're in bad shape.
Well, we could see demand destruction in the U.S. If we see that big flip on the corn and the soybean acre. You know, there's people saying, you know, based on, and we had the Pro Farmer Crop Tour last week that's estimating a lot lower corn crop than what the WASDE told us the week prior. But whether we're at 185 or 188, there's a feeling here the market signals are going to be to plant more beans. That's less demand for something like nitrogen for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is, when we look at it right now, and we had to build our fertilizer demand models based on what our 2026 grain expectations were, you know, back in June, July. Fully transparent. We know the number is going to change, but we had to start somewhere. And when we looked at the bean situation, the corn situation, wheat, and everything else out there, we're still figuring corn acres in 2026 are probably 93 million acres.
Oh, you're that high still. Okay.
We're that high. Now, again, to your point, that is going to continue to change. We had to start somewhere, but let's go back to that yield number. If we're talking 180, 185, 188, whatever the number is, if it's 180 anything, that is a massive crop. And what does a massive crop do? It removes a massive amount of nutrients. We can talk about, you know, reducing a lot of the fields have got, you know, really good supplies left in the soil. They've been applying very, very well, but that's kind of the exception, not the rule out there. And if you're pulling a lot, you've got to replace some of that, or we're going to have to start talking about what yield potential is for next year.
Okay, potash. But we didn't talk about that yet. Obviously, that's a lot of productions in Canada, a lot of uses in America. So where's potash line up?
It is dead quiet. Nothing going on. That market has been range bound within a $5 to $10 collar. Nothing's going on. Manufacturers act like they're fairly well sold. Buyers here seems like everything's okay. The potash flows back and forth between the Canada-U.S. border. It's always been, from our perspective, outside of the touch of tariffs, so that hasn't really played effect. That discussion point helped prices go up from the start of the year, but it never actually turned into a tariff rate. So fortunately, potash is just kind of holding steady.
So going forward, if I'm a farmer and in the market to sort out when I'm going to be purchasing, obviously there's considerations here, not just price, but you know, when do I need to take delivery and all those kinds of things. What are the things I need to be watching here right now as I look at these different types of inputs?
I think first thing needs to be having a conversation with your supplier, retailer, co-op, whatever it is, and find out how they're positioned. We always look at it from our own perspective, from the farmer perspective. What we don't look at is from the retailer perspective. They're looking at the exact same high price. They are hearing the stories of, I'm not going to put it on, I'm going to reduce my rates, I'm going to wait till spring, whatever the situation is. Well, they also can't sit there and take all the price risks. So they might be a little more conservative. That you may go have that conversation like, listen, we're not buying what we normally do based on the feedback that we are getting. And if all of a sudden October 15th, we wake up one morning and say, yeah, you know what, we want to go ahead and put it on. We go show up. Hey, I want to put that on. Well, I'll go see what I can find and how quickly I can get it here. But I've been pushing really hard, man, to have these conversations be had, because if we wait till the last minute, we may find out the market just wasn't willing to put those tons in place.
How big of a concern is, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, regarding the barges on the river, in terms of the age of some of those barges and coming, some of them being decommissioned or need to be replaced. How big of a concern is that to, a lot of times we talk about the river levels, but in this case, we're talking about just the supply of the barges. How big of a concern is that for the fertilizer industry?
If we all of a sudden start removing a lot of the barge and that starts to reduce the capacity, the ability to move product up the river, it's massive. I mean, you think about what a big deal it is when the upper Mississippi River shuts down just for the wintertime, right? North of St. Louis, it shuts down every winter for flows and ice and all that kind of stuff. It has a huge impact on basis. If all of a sudden we start reducing the capability of the market to move tons because there's just not enough barges to move it, it's huge. One of the biggest assets that we have here in the U.S. is that river system. If we start to reduce that capacity, man, we're in trouble.
Yeah. What are some of the other headwaters for fertilizers supply and getting it to the farmer? Is there any other ones you're watching at all?
Rail seems like it's doing all right. Truck is truck. River's been doing okay. There's some low water down south, but for the most part, everything seems to be working out pretty well. Right now, the biggest thing is just the trepidation. It's the fear of putting product in place, because a lot of this market was around in 2008. It was around in 2012. We remember prices going from sky high and all of a sudden they just bottomed out. Yeah. It doesn't feel like that's the case today, but that doesn't mean that doesn't influence your buying patterns and what you put in place.
Yeah, I think for the farmer, when we have tight margins like this, You don't want to, and the input being such a large component of that expense side of the equation, there's a lot of trepidation to commit at the wrong time, because it could be the difference between maybe being, on the negative side versus the positive side. So I understand the hesitancy in some cases to not want to step out, especially if you don't have your 26 crop locked in either.
Right. Yeah. Why wouldn't they wait? Because they're sitting there looking at it and they're like, well, what's my grain price look like? Oh, it doesn't look very good. What's my input price look like? Oh, that's not very good. Why would I be in a hurry to want to step in and lock that in today? There's nothing fantastic. There's nothing jumping out as a huge opportunity. If I drag my feet, maybe something happens. Maybe there's a trade deal with China that raises the grain prices. Maybe there's new production or something that happens with fertilizer and that price starts to plummet. Why lock in a bad price today? But, you talk about the trepidation. Having a conversation with Dad several weeks ago on his fall inputs. And I said, well, here's all my reasoning. I think you ought to go ahead and buy it. He's like, all right, I'll do that. I said, sorry. He's like, what are you sorry about? I was like, you're going to see these prices. It's not great. They are high. It's going to be uncomfortable. 2025 is not a great year. 26 doesn't look a whole lot better today. Things can change.
Yeah, I was talking to a farmer last week who said to me, it was on nitrogen, the price of nitrogen has got to come down because the market has fallen when it comes to some of the commodities, or we've drifted lower. We're trying to find some sort of a base here. How we're like like in 2021, we saw commodity markets lift, input prices were slow. What we're seeing now is commodity markets have fallen and input prices have had that same hesitancy to the downside. Is this just normal course of them just not following each other on a day-to-day basis? There's quite a lag.
The market's always really easy to go up, right? Because if all of a sudden, let's just say grain prices start to skyrocket, well, every buyer in the world's going to be like, oh, I know how this plays out. I'm going to go buy my stuff. So even if the replacement market doesn't move with it, if everybody starts to buy and all this demand starts shoving forward, prices move up really, really quickly. What happens when the price starts to fall? Everything shuts down. I remember my wife wanted me to build garden boxes, and I wouldn't go price the lumber at the high of it, and it was outrageous. I'm not doing it. Well, futures and everything else started to fall. I went back to Lowe's and took a look. Prices hadn't moved because nobody's buying the inventory to get to the cheaper stuff. So it's always a quick to go up and a slow to come down. The important thing to know, and this is at least for phosphate and nitrogen, maybe not so much on potash, but we look to the past to see signs of what to watch for in the future. And so we look at 08, we look at 12, and we're like, hey, those prices fell out of bed. It can happen again. I still maintain those were demand-driven marketplace. And when that demand stopped, prices did fall out because there was never a supply issue. The things we're dealing with today, it's driven by a lack of supply, tight supplies. And that makes it much, much stickier. If your demand falls away, the supplier's sitting there saying, there ain't a whole lot of it out there. I don't need to drop my price yet. The day may come, but today is not that day.
Yeah, I'm surprised we're getting more calls for expansion of domestic production.
I have been talking a lot about that. Picked up on the fall travels already, and that's a part of my presentation is looking at what is our consumption here in the States, North America, what do we import, and then you look at where these imports come from. I mean, take nitrogen, for example. You're buying it from places like Russia and the Middle East and things like that, and we've got some of the lowest priced natural gas. We can produce it cleaner than the rest of the world, and our demand's right here. Why are we not producing this stuff at home? But it's really hard to find outside money to want to do it because you're talking billions of dollars, and the manufacturers all in the radiant space are kind of like, well, I like it how it is today.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, we've been talking to Josh Linville of StoneX, like the man when it comes to analyzing these fertilizer markets. Josh, really appreciate you joining us.
Anytime.
Hey, when we come back here on RealAg Radio, we're going to talk to Darcy Pawlik. He's executive director with the Wheat Growers Association. Old habits die hard there. Right back right after this.
Protect your anhydrous ammonia application earlier than normal this fall. Defend against potential losses and protect your bottom line with new Centuro A-Pro Nitrogen Stabilizer. Patented active ingredient Pronitridine offers agronomically effective protection where it matters most, below ground. The new concentrated formulation lowers application rates. Start early with Centuro A-Pro as part of your nitrogen management plan. Contact your local retailer or visit centuro.ca for more information today.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is a video series that showcases the latest in canola research and production agronomy. Learn from some of the best at your own pace through quick and timely producer-focused videos available on our YouTube channel. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is the quickest way to keep up to date on all the latest in canola production. Boost your canola IQ with the Canola School, brought to you by BASF, and visit canolaschool.com.
Built on over 100 years of seed innovation and unwavering commitment to farmers, Pioneer 100 Series canola hybrids deliver a step change in yield performance and agronomic traits. This isn't just better canola, it's different canola. Pioneer 100 Series. Contact your local Pioneer sales representative or visit pioneer.com/100 series to learn more today. One of the big requirements in Canada, from my opinion, is the need to focus on infrastructure around transportation. And it was really fun last week where I got to speak to the TEGMA organization in Kansas City. Railways, grain companies, basically all of the stakeholders are looking to get grain and oilseeds from the farm to the destination, whether it's domestic or to the port. The question is, are we as competitive in a country like Canada as we need to be when it comes to some of this infrastructure? And does there need to be a greater investment as Kearney looks for these shovel-ready projects? Here to talk about this issue is Darcy Pawlik. He's Executive Director with the Wheat Growers Association. How are we doing today, Darcy?
Very well, thanks, Shaun. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we got a column that's posted at RealAgriculture.com by the chair of your association, Daryl Franzu, a farmer from Saskatchewan. I guess, are we in trouble on this front? Do we have gaps between where we need to be on trade infrastructure versus where we are?
John, I think we've been in trouble for quite a long time. We think about who we're competing with. Certainly within the Americas, there's a lot of good examples. And you kind of mentioned the States. Well, they can go northeast, south, or west, right? If they're in the Midwest, the Mississippi is there to carry it off to all sorts of different locations. They've got lots of port capacity both in the south and the west, and they can still move things through Canada. So without a doubt, I think that we're in a situation where, and have been for a while, where we can look at those kind of investments as, like you say, shovel ready. Let's get some wins in the bank here. And now is certainly the time for it.
Yeah, there's at least we're talking about it. Whether or not there's the willingness to act, that's yet to be sort of see where this all shakes out. But you use the U.S. as a comparison. There is a lot of concern about some of that barge fleet, how it's so aging. I think the U.S. is going through some of the same thing where, and this is my feeling, maybe we've rested on our infrastructure laurels for a long time as our competitive advantage. I'm very worried about South America and the infrastructure that is going in Brazil, because if Brazil obviously has figured out how to grow corn and beans, if they figure out their infrastructure part, we've really got a problem.
And you've got it, and it's not just Brazil. The other side of South America and Peru are making quick and big advancements as well. Even Mexico is looking at different expansion projects. So, we're not even keeping up with the times, and we're seeing a lot of these countries, but I mean the crops within them and the companies that run them, kind of leapfrog what we're able to do. And it's a little bit bewildering. I mean, we're an advanced economy. We have, strong insights as to what's going on in different markets. So, I mean, it's not like we're not seeing this unfold in front of our eyes, but, I think the surprising part is nobody's raising the flag and saying, hey, it's time to act. Like, let's do some things. Let's stop talking about it and let's start doing it.
So, Darcy, from your perspective, what is the action part? So if somebody said, hey, okay, Darcy, this makes a lot of sense to me. You got me convinced. What do we need to do? What are those points?
There's probably a handful of, I'll call them low-hanging fruit, but, let's call a spade a spade. Nothing is inexpensive today. So we look at just the bottlenecks. Where are we getting hung up from a trade perspective? As you approach the ports, Second Narrows Bridge is a great example of infrastructure that could just be double tracked. Just make sure that we can maintain the steady flow of trains back and forth. They're getting to port, they're bringing and they're taking. And then when you get to port, the last port expansion was hundreds of millions of dollars, took it well over a decade. You're just delayed, just trying to get the different, whether it's a safety, environmental assessment, you name it. But port capacity is huge. And let's be honest. I mean, we spend a lot of time when we speak to CN, CP, we talk to the port authorities. They say, what continues to make sense is investing in Vancouver. You got the people, you got the infrastructure, you got skilled and available labor. The trains already run back and forth through it. And so, when you think of what immediate actions can be taken, I mean, that becomes really the de facto, at least infrastructure place for things to happen. And at least for ourselves and what we're being made to understand through the different reports is that, Prince Rupert, some of the northern gateways, you don't have that same infrastructure. You don't have the people. You've got things like Tundra. You've got all sorts of different problems. So, not that we want to continue to rely on one conduit, but it's the one that makes the most sense right now, and at least for that short-term kind of win scenario.
Are you a proponent of Churchill and it being more open throughout the year?
I mean, we would like to see that be an option, but we just don't see it as being a viable immediate term option. I mean, Tundra is real, freezing, thawing is real. I'm certainly not bright enough to understand all the engineering, but what we see is, kind of red flag after red flag after red flag of the feasibility of it kind of unfolding, especially in the near term. So it's not that we don't want to see that take place in the future. I just think it's a pretty big lift with a lot of challenges that would be in the way.
Now, one of the things that Daryl Franzu wrote in his piece is that physical infrastructure is only part of the challenge here. Canada's regulatory framework for approving crop protection tools and other agricultural innovation lags behind competitors like the U.S. and Brazil. He does have a call to action here. The Wheat Growers Association has called for a regulatory delivery oversight body to fast-track science-based approvals, cutting delays that erode yield, stifle innovation, and push investment elsewhere. Talk about that.
Bit of a mouthful, hey?
Daryl likes a longer sentence.
Well, sometimes it takes a lot of words to kind of explain something, but let me break it down pretty quick. And I've had the benefit of working with a lot of regulators. They're great. They absolutely do a fantastic job at making sure we're safe. But if we look over the last, call it at least 20 years, 25 that I've been around, we regulate a lot of things that are safe. And we put a ton of scrutiny into making sure that they're safe. Meanwhile, other countries can do the same things faster. They're commercializing ahead of us. Their farmers are getting those tools. It's increasing their ability to capture larger margins, gain productivity. So fast forward to, okay, so what? What are we doing? And I think what we're starting to see is there's sort of too much sort of internalism of, the bureaucracy and the regulatory bodies that are able to, conduct consultations. And it seems like regardless of what you say, it doesn't seem to go or be taken to heart. Regulations in particular, we've seen, I've collected over 20 studies that tell me cut red tape, make sure there's more efficiency, really focus in on the things that need regulating. And then in there as well as, they could use extra funding. And you know what they cherry pick? Well, let's get more funding, but not pay attention to any of the standards, any usage of data from other countries that could be useful. And so kind of fast forward to the so what, or at least what the wheat growers are having conversations about. Let's get a management layer. Let's have an understanding, get some folks from industry that, are very comfortable making decisions. They can prioritize, do some of the things that are uncomfortable, whether it's in a political arena or a regulatory arena, what have you, and just decompartmentalize the two. Let them do what they're really good at and continue to keep us safe. But let's have sort of a business, sort of a competitiveness approach to how we regulate. And then that way we can start investing capital. We can start getting venture capital funds that are large, and we can make sure that, the farmers and Western Canada is pretty good for making sure that they're taking on experiments and working with, whether it's like Emertech or if it's some of the funds, like we're all in, man. So, that's what we want to see, Shaun, and we think would go a long way to really progressing Canada along the continuum of places that companies want to continue to invest in.
Yeah, and you mentioned the railways earlier, CN and the CPKC. Do you feel that they're investing enough?
I mean, the dollars aren't small that they continue to put in. They still have to act on behalf of their shareholders. And make sure that the investments are going to the right places. So I think we'd like to see more investment in Canada. But what we hear from them is, and I shouldn't speak for them, but environmental safety assessments take forever. Building takes a long time.
Yeah.
They're trying to mix up in the interswitching, and they really kind of scratch their head and say, yeah, okay, maybe it could make sense, but like logistically, it's super hard. So we're kind of jumping towards solutions without really kind of understanding the greater whole in some circumstance. So yeah, absolutely. Or we'd like to see more public-private partnerships is, I think, a pretty fine idea between them and the feds and the provinces, and really start getting, let's get some shovels in the ground.
I had said to somebody a couple weeks ago that sometimes I think the attitude towards, like, for example, the rail companies, for an example, is that they're a charity or something. Like they obviously have to make money too, but if the Canadian economy is going to be robust, obviously there's domestic consumption, but it's a country of only 40 million people. It is incredibly export driven. Now, some of that can happen by truck, for example, especially, to certain parts of Canada or to, the northern tier of the United States, in East and West Coast. But rail is a critical component to get product, not just agricultural products, but just Canadian exports to port. If having the capacity and making sure that because you can't have bottlenecks at any part, right? A lot of times we focus on the terminal and the terminal's doing this or not doing that, but like there's the whole evaluation of the entire chain and trying to continuously improve it is really, really what I think the Canadian economy is after here to really hum.
Couldn't agree with you more, Shaun. And we're hopeful. And hope is not a strategy, but that, there's folks out there that are looking at this and they're starting to stitch together kind of and build a roadmap of understanding, what are the bottlenecks? What do we have to do better? Where are we kind of falling short? Make it in comparison to other countries and say, well, what are the best practices maybe that we can adopt?
Yes.
And let's not forget, it doesn't just stop at infrastructure. We've got, labor's a little bit of an issue too. Last year was, to say painful is a huge understatement of what can happen when we get the disagreements, whether it's on the rails, whether it's on the ports. There's all sorts of different places. And our image as a Canadian brand, it just plummets every single time that happens. And, I've had the good pleasure of being able to speak with a lot of very large international makers, bakers, and millers. And they tell the story. Consistency is number one. They've only got, 12, 15 days supply. If they aren't getting what they need on time and their plants sit idle, those are millions and millions of dollars per day that they're losing. So, we really got to give our heads a bit of a shake. Just like let's start tackling the easy stuff, Shaun. That's what our biggest encouragement would certainly be right now. Well,
and attracting capital and attracting investment into the country where this is a place that you want to do business. And it's not, obviously one of the advantages Canada has is it is adjacent to the largest economy in the world, but that's only one piece of it. We also have to make sure that this is a good place to do business, period. And I think, in the regulatory sense, and sometimes from an infrastructure perspective, that is becoming questionable in comparison to other jurisdictions.
Yeah, it is. I think we should give ourselves a pat on the back for the stability of our system. We do really need to start thinking about, incrementally, how can we get better?
Push ourselves.
You don't have to stop being stable, but still find ways to improve,
Good stuff.
Right.
Well, hey, Darcy, really do appreciate you joining us here. And I think we're going to continue to get some columns out of the chair of the Wheat Growers Association, Daryl Franzu. Do appreciate. He sometimes appears on the Farmer Rapid Fire on the Thursday episode of the show as well. So, hey, Darcy, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Yeah, very welcome, Shaun. Have a great one, everyone.
Hey, great stuff. When we come back on RealAg Radio, we're going to get an idea and a sense of farm profitability and some of the challenges in North American agriculture. We're going to talk to John Newton. He's with Terrain Ag, and he joins us coming up next. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147.
The new Brand XT grain cart delivers unmatched forward auger reach, side auger reach, and discharge spout clearance for easy positioning, with sight lines that allow you to actually see what you're doing while you're doing it, saving you time with each load and getting you back to the combine sooner. They say hindsight is 20/20. We say seeing what's in front of you is better. Lead the field with the new XT grain cart from Brand.
The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com has everything you need to get your crop off to a great start and a strong finish. Whether you're growing chickpeas, fava beans, lentils, or peas, you'll get all the latest and best agronomic information at PulseSchool.com. A library of top-notch agronomy videos from industry experts available on demand at your fingertips. Visit the Pulse School, brought to you by BASF on RealAgriculture.com.
Well, no shocker to anybody out there in the Real Agriculture audience. There's a lot of concerns out in farm country across Canada and the U.S. when it comes to profitability. Things are going well in the beef sector at this current time. Well deserved. There was some hardship, of course, for a number of years. But in the cropping sector, things are a bit of a challenge. A bit of an understatement there. We're joined right now by John Newton, who's executive head with Terrain. How are we doing today, John?
I'm doing pretty good. Nice to be here.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. Last week I was in Kansas City at the TEGMA conference, their fall conference, and I shared some data, profitability, well, not profitability, some loss data for the U.S. across the major crops. Man, we are in a real tough spell here right now from a profitability perspective.
I mean, without a doubt. I mean, you look across the major crops in the United States, corn, soybeans, wheat, cotton, rice, grain, sorghum. I mean, most of these crops are entering, their third or fourth year with margins that are at or below break even. I think there's probably some difference if you own your ground versus renting your ground, but where these prices are, even with record yields on the horizon, it's a tight margin environment.
Yeah, the one that sticks out, and I'm not going to profess to be any sort of an expert on cotton, but cotton is in like real ugly territory, minus 400 an acre. I know there's a wide, spectrum of yields in the cotton production area, but cotton is a mess.
Let me tell you, so earlier this year, Chairman Thompson on the House Ag Committee asked me to testify on the conditions in the farm economy, and there was a witness next to me. She was a cotton producer from Texas, and in her testimony, she actually said her grandfather had passed away, and they found a receipt in a desk drawer from when he had sold cotton 60 years ago for 60 cents a pound, and her cash bid that week was less than that. I mean, that paints a pretty clear picture on what's happening in the cotton industry. I know yields have improved dramatically since that point in time, but with input costs where they are today, the squeeze is very real.
And as I've learned when I've spent time in the cotton producing areas, very susceptible to trade with China, more so even than soybeans is kind of what my understanding is. But okay,
absolutely,
yeah, okay. So policy wise here, what needs to happen? Because it's been interesting. A couple of meetings I've been at, a lot of people focusing on domestic consumption around biofuels as a key piece of this. Are you a proponent of that right now?
I mean, absolutely. I don't think there's one policy lever that you can pull to turn this thing around. I mean, I think it's multiple levers. And you mentioned biofuels. If a certain individual decided to get on True Social and say we support year-round E15, that'd probably go a long way by itself. If China came to the market and started buying beans, that would certainly help. The regulatory rollbacks that we're seeing across the country are certainly going to help bottom lines. We need to do something on ag labor reform. So there's not just one policy solution. We need a all of the above approach to really help the farm economy. And I think the big challenge that we're going to see is in USDA's next farm income report that they're going to publish right after Labor Day. I expect they're going to publish a record high nominal net farm income, but that's really masking what's happening in the crop sector because of how well the cattle sector's doing.
Yeah, well, and we had earlier Josh Linville from StoneX here on the show, and those fertilizer prices. I think it sounds like we can expect them to remain as sticky as they have been. So if that's your big wish to improve profitability, you're going to probably be a little bit disappointed. As you talk to people in DC, is there much push right now for labor reform as it applies to farm workers?
I think every farmer, when they come to Washington, D.C., one of the top things that they would always say is, we need a strong risk management program. We need, better risk management tools, but we also need to make sure that the workers are going to show up. And they depend on, believe it or not, I believe about 40% of the workers in the crop space are migrant workers, undocumented migrant workers. So we do need a policy fix for that. We also need a policy fix in terms of the H-2A program, the adverse effect wage rate that is completely unpredictable and over the last decade has increased by over 50%. So if you don't even know what you're going to have to pay your workers next year, and talk about that kind of uncertainty. So we need fixes in the ag labor market for sure. And now we've got border security, so there should be some momentum to do that.
Yeah, and you're in California right now, and I'll tell you, when you talk to the fruit and veg industry, for example, in California, very, very much looking for changes to that H-2A program, specifically the need for it. Dairies like this too, the need for it to be 12 months of the year, not just 6 months.
I mean, absolutely. You got to milk a cow every single day. And the H-2A program doesn't provide that year-round flexibility. It's a seasonal guest worker program. So absolutely, the dairy industry needs a fix. All of agriculture needs a fix when it comes to ag labor. Even if you're in the crop space and you're using H-2A workers to drive a truck, I mean, the wages, and I believe the Trump administration's fixing this, but what you had to pay a worker depended on what type of jobs they did on the farm, regardless of how much time they actually spent doing that job. So you had some workers that may drive a truck for an hour getting a much higher wage because of that 1 hour that's classified as a higher skilled job.
We heard this week at Farm Progress Show, Deputy Secretary Vaden was at the show and used the phrase bridge to talk about the potential need to get some money into some of these rural communities with some sort of ad hoc farm programming. He referred to the fact that the big, beautiful bill, the budget reconciliation bill, there's changes there that are advantageous to farmers, but that money's not going to get in their hands quick enough. Do you think that there's a big push in DC here this fall to do some sort of ad hoc programming?
Well, I think they're looking at everything that's happening right now. The lack of purchases by the Chinese of soybeans. They're thinking about when the payments from the one big beautiful bill is going to get out the door. They're looking at crop margins and where they are today, and they're looking in the toolbox. What tools do we have to provide any type of bridge? And I think right now they're in an information finding mode to see what exactly they can do, maybe administratively, or do they need to go to Congress to get some things that they may need to provide some sort of temporary fix. But Judge Vaden is very sharp. He's tracking all these issues. I have high confidence that if he's looking for a solution to help the sector, that they're going to find one.
Yeah, you mentioned domestically year-round E15 from a corn perspective makes so much sense. Some people pushing for, we got to get moving with SAF here. Like we talked about it, let's get some things in motion. On the trade front, it just doesn't seem, it's not very evident that there's this low-hanging fruit of, hey, look at all of, this extra volume we're going to build, in some sort of massive deal, I guess, besides China. But that seems to be not really having a lot of momentum here right now.
Well, I think there's a difference, right? And going back to what Judge Vaden's talking about with a bridge, I mean, you have these trade deals that are being announced, but the challenge is it takes a long time for us to get a foothold in those markets. And the one big beautiful bill doubled MAP and FMD funding, which is going to help the collaborators, the corn growers, the dairy industry, et cetera, soybean industry, go out and find and develop those new markets. But again, that takes years and years and years to really grow a new customer overseas. So while we've got these deals, there's not a single trade deal outside of China that is enough to move the needle in a big way, in a big hurry.
Yeah, well, in India is another one where relationships have gone pretty cold since Modi was in the White House earlier in the spring. Indeed, and that's another big buyer, but that's going to take some time as well.
Well, the thing I don't think a lot of people realize, I believe India has about 5 million farmers in the country out in the rural areas, and they heavily subsidize agriculture, in the country. So getting access for U.S. agricultural products in India, fair access is going to be tricky.
You're at a farm credit meeting in California. You're going to give your keynote here this afternoon, talking about the 10 key risks in agriculture. I know you've got commodity markets, you've got input prices, you've probably got the weather. What's on that list that maybe doesn't get talked about enough?
You're looking for a sneak peek. All the usual suspects, that farmers are dealing with is on that list. Climate, weather variability, trade issues. We have a big series at Terrain called The Big Shrink. Declining global population. That's a big deal. The Make America Healthy Again agenda and what that may mean for agriculture. GLP-1 use and food consumption. How's that going to impact, folks that are using GLP-1s are looking for a nutrient-dense diet. They're moving away from processed foods. That's going to have an impact on the sugar industry. It's going to have an impact on the snack industry, the soda industry, AI, artificial intelligence. I mean, the list is super long. I had a challenge actually keeping it to 10 items. And then I added a bonus risk, and that is the political pendulum. That, in the United States, you're running for Congress every 2 years. Midterms are right around the corner. We swung real far to the right. What's going to happen, a year and a half from now? Are we going to end up swinging back to the left? What happens in 2028? And so you make progress on regulatory reform, and then you swing it back and overcorrect the other way with even more regulations. And then 4 years later, you swing it back. And there are a lot of things to get hung up in that, pesticide reviews, waters of the U.S. I mean, there's so many things from a regulatory perspective, from a farm economy perspective, they can get caught up in that political pendulum.
Yeah, and John, one of the impacts of that political pendulum as it swings is capital doesn't like that. Capital likes stability. They don't want the political risk. If we're going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in this manufacturing facility, or over $1 billion, we need to know that the rug's not going to be pulled out from under us in 2 years. Right. Capital doesn't like that.
No, and I'll give you a good example. I mean, the Biden administration pumped hundreds of billions of dollars really in an effort to try to jumpstart the green energy revolution. And there was money going out to rural electric co-ops. You think the Trump administration, just recently talked about solar panels and no more subsidies for that, or windmills on agricultural ground. But the money was flowing for 4 years, and now it's changed. And so you're right. Capital doesn't like those shifts, and they like to know what's coming their way before they make these large scale investments. And that's the reality. When we swing from one side of the aisle to the other, things are going to change.
Especially when change is happening through executive order, not through Congress. That's another, things can flip very quickly.
Well, through executive order, yes. I think I would argue back that the American people voted for this. They voted for.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think some folks are pleased with the tax cuts that were made permanent. The death of the death tax is a great thing. And I think this administration does work very well with their Republicans on Capitol Hill.
My point is, if you were able to do it through Congress, the changes that people voted for, it would have it would have a greater chance of longevity to it. Is my point.
Oh, absolutely. Hey, well, actually, let me pull you back a little bit, because the Biden administration, through reconciliation, pushed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is where all of those green energy resources, financial resources came from. And then through the most recent reconciliation package, the One Big Beautiful Bill, you were able to go in and, through rescissions, pull back a lot of that money that Congress had provided 4 years ago. So I think that's where the pendulum swings at the White House and on Capitol Hill, that can change things pretty quickly.
Well put. We've been talking to John Newton. He's executive head at Terrain. John, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Appreciate the opportunity to join you.
When we come back on RealAg Radio, we're going to get to your feedback, your emails, your text message. We'll do that right after this.
Although the cost per ton is higher, RiseAbsorb is cheaper per acre than MAP. RiseAbsorb is more efficient, therefore we use less fertilizer to deliver the same amount of phosphorus to the crop. On average, growers save $5 to $7 per acre, and RiseAbsorb has a demonstrated yield increase of 3 to 5 bushels, generating a $20 ROI compared to MAP. You can go to phospholutions.com and check out our grower savings calculator and see how much you can save on your farm.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. Okay, we got a little bit of time here for some of your feedback. Got an email from Gary. He's talking about this U.S., China, Canada triangle and how it impacts the canola tariffs and EV tariffs and all the stuff that is happening. Okay, I wrote an opinion column that I encourage you to check out at RealAgriculture.com, Autos Over Ag. And Gary says Trump wants no tariffs, so why would Carney start putting tariffs on products coming north? Poor judgment. I think Carney is hoping the States puts pressure on Trump, but it's not working. Appreciate that email, Gary. This is in reference to the end of last week, Prime Minister Carney removing and instead going with more matching tariffs on the U.S. tariffs that already exist. Gary thinks that Carney is very much being played. Email here from Jennifer, who is in Saskatchewan, who says, hey, thanks for the Autos Over Ag article. Very well researched, well written, and well thought out. Brings up excellent points the general public doesn't often consider. I hope it gets a lot of exposure. Well, thank you, Jennifer. She continues, the article also increased my respect for you as an editor and the institution of real agriculture as a whole. It plainly shows you are able to be objective, see as many sides of the issue as possible, and bring them together in a thoughtful way. You seem to be promoting the idea of Canadian unity and the holistic approach that must be taken when running a country. I respect that form of journalism and appreciate the thoughtful, nonpartisan view of the issue. Well, that is very sweet of you, Jennifer. I really appreciate that. Not all my emails are like that, so but I very much do appreciate that that comment. Now, you can provide feedback as much as... Oh, here's another one. On the cattle market, sorry, not on the cattle market, on the CCA ABP situation, Dwayne sent an email, and he says, now this is referring to Tyler Fulton, the president of CCA, saying that the finances of CCA are complex. They're trying to explain where all the money flows. And there was a few people that took issue with that and how, we need to have a more simple answer. And then maybe that's part of the credit, maybe that sort of feeds the criticism the ABP has. Maybe it is too complex. Anyway, Dwayne sends me an email and he says, that word complex, that's the kicker. So short and sweet there from Dwayne. Now, if you want to be like all of some of these emails that we've read, you can provide me with your feedback, your opinions, your thoughts, shaney@realagriculture.com. Or, of course, you can call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Tomorrow on the show, we've got the Farmer Rapid Fire. We're going to talk to farmers across the country, find out how they're making out as we head into harvest and the fall run for cattle. Lots happening in the world of agriculture. We've got you covered. Brought to you by Pioneer Seeds Canada. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. We'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody. Man, great show today. Really had a lot of fun. Fantastic guests, great insights. It was great chatting with John Newton of Terrain, Josh Linville of StoneX about those fertilizer markets, as well as Darcy Pawlik from the Wheat Growers Association. So let's get to some of the top ag news stories of the day. Lots happening in the world of agriculture, indeed. The Globe and Mail reports that Mark Carney has wrapped up a 4-day tour of Eastern and Central Europe on Wednesday with a visit to Canadian Forces members stationed at Camp Adazi in Latvia, where Canada leads a NATO mission aimed at countering Russian aggression in the region. I think a lot of times we focus a lot on, hey, did this politician or that politician or the prime minister, did they get out into parts of Canada and see farmers or people working in forestry or, the fishing industry. But I think it's really important that we see somebody like the prime minister visiting the troops that are stationed abroad. About 2,000 Canadian troops are stationed at the base as part of the Operation Reassurance, which includes 14 NATO members. The Prime Minister announced the day before that Canada will be extending its mission in Latvia for another 3 years. Canada's involvement in Latvia started in 2014 as a response to Russia's initial invasion of Ukraine. Executives from Italian food giant Ferrero hopscotched around the U.S. in late June, touring cereal factories at the center of the most unusual public health controversies in years. This is a story from the Wall Street Journal. President Trump's top health official, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., had said the artificial dyes in W.K. Kellogg's Fruit Loops, a fixture in grocery store cereal aisles since 1963, were poisoning America's children. Ferrero had offered to buy the 119-year-old cereal business, which was struggling, but acquiring Kellogg meant stepping into a political mess. Kennedy had vowed to crack down on processed food and was blasting big food companies for using the dyes and other additives. After weighing Kellogg's financial and political problems, Ferrero cut its offer by about $75 million. That's called leverage. According to a recent securities filing, agreeing to buy the company in a deal that valued it at $3.1 billion. The Trump administration's Make America Healthy Again agenda has shaken big food companies already reeling from the shifting consumer preferences. States across the country have taken up the MAHA cause, passing laws to restrict the sale of certain foods and in some cases investigating food companies' health claims. Executives at big processed food makers are trying to determine how much of what Kennedy and Maha want will actually happen and how it could affect their bottom lines. Their challenge is to balance its push for what he sees as healthier food with their need to make products that consumers will buy. My thought here is this is just creating a whole nother level round of lawsuits of people with health concerns suing food companies, like we have seen what's happening with people that have developed cancer suing Bayer because of glyphosate use, even though the science says that it does not cause cancer. I see the same here, and the liability. You just look at the liability concerns that Bayer has had. If we start to see a bunch of payouts because somebody couldn't say no to maybe consuming too much what we would consider the middle of the grocery store, the processed foods aisles, I don't know. At some point there's some personal responsibility in this. I kind of have a hard time with this one. I do. I also don't agree with Secretary Kennedy's assertion that sugar is poison and things like that. I think this is a real battleground here right now. Agriculture very much in the middle of it. Do we need to encourage people to take on more exercise, maybe eating a little bit more nutrient-dense foods? Absolutely. But I think also consumers want a choice. They deserve a choice. And you just imagine if this worked another way, where you think about some of the pushback against red meat in the past. What if Maha said, hey, we don't, and they're not saying this, but I'm just giving you an example. What if they said, hey, you know what? You need to eat less red meat for these reasons. We would push back really hard. It's about consumer choice. And I think that there needs to be more pushback when it comes to some of the push. Now, if there's there's actually scientifically proven dangerous ingredients, I'm with you. And again, if you're listening to this show in the U.S., this is really, really striking home because obviously this is a U.S.-based issue. But if you're in Canada, it has an impact because a lot of the way that things are produced in the U.S. and if it comes in Canada with some of the same under the same production rules. Although I did not realize that Fruit Loops in Canada were different than Fruit Loops in the U.S. That was news to me as they got rid of some of those artificial dyes. India. Now, I have a new Frontlines podcast up, my conversation with Jacob Shapiro with the Bespoke Group. And we talk about the frosty relationship between India and China right now. And of course, Prime Minister Modi was in the White House in the spring, India and the U.S., best friends. And ever since then, we've been on a slippery slope, a big slip and slide downwards. And it seems like it's getting worse. So according to the Wall Street Journal, steep U.S. tariffs on a range of Indian products took effect Wednesday, threatening a steep blow to India's overseas trade and to its largest export market. President Donald Trump had initially announced 25% tariff on Indian goods, but earlier this month he signed an executive order imposing an additional 25% due to India's purchases of Russian oil, bringing the combined tariffs imposed by the U.S. on its ally to 50%. Yeah, I will add in here, there's a lot of people suggesting that the whole thing about India buying Russian oil is a little bit of a scapegoat here, that, the U.S. buys a lot of Russian fertilizer, right? We heard that earlier today from Josh Linville as an example. So I know that definitely that's the leverage point that they're using. The Indian government estimates the tariffs will impact $48.2 billion worth of exports. Officials have warned the new duties could make shipments to the U.S. commercially unviable, triggering job losses and slower economic growth. India-U.S. trade relations have expanded in recent years, but remain vulnerable to disputes over market access and domestic political pressures. India is one of the fastest-growing major global economies, and it may face a slowdown as a result. Estimates by New Delhi-based think tank Global Trade Research Initiative suggest labor-intensive sectors such as textiles, gems and jewelry, leather goods, food, and automobiles will be hit the hardest. Again, you have heard me say many times, if you think that trade with China is difficult, let me introduce you to their friend, India. And I said this to Jacob Shapiro in the Frontlines podcast. I do believe there is a level of naivety in terms of how easy it is going to be for the U.S. to negotiate a trade deal with India. It has not been easy for anyone. And even for the largest economy in the world, it is going to be difficult, especially if you are trying to get more agricultural exports into that country. It is very rurally focused. There's something like 5 million farmers in the country, and it's going to be a challenge. And when you talk to U.S. trade officials about that, they, behind the scenes, they're saying the same thing. So, yeah, don't expect any big trade deal between, maybe a pause and a little bit of like, hey, we're going to do a 90-day extension. We're going to remove some of these tariffs. I can see that. But do I see some sort of comprehensive trade deal between the two of them? Even in the next 3 years, I'd take the under. And when I say under, the under probability that it actually happens are my thoughts. I could very much be proven wrong. Canada has a long experience of trying to do this, and it's a very up and down affair, no different than some of the trade that the trade relationship with China. Speaking of China, all eyes from a commodity complex standpoint on when is China going to start buying some U.S. soybeans. This could be connected somewhat if you wanted to draw a narrative when China will start buying Canadian canola again. Obviously, in the canola situation, they're using Australia canola again for the first time in a number of years. So this story from AgWeb, written by Ty Morgan, the host of U.S. Farm Report. Farmers in the Northern Plains are facing cash soybean prices below $9, and with China absent from the soybean export market, $8 soybeans could continue to be a reality this harvest. In fact, Dan Bossier, president and founder of Ag Resource Company, says the Chinese government is continuing to instruct Chinese importers to not buy U.S. soybeans. Until that changes, soybean prices are likely to remain low. I think the big question here for me, and what we've been asking a lot of commodity analysts, that makes sense in the short term. It's pressure on the U.S. from a trade perspective, without saying, hey, here's a whole bunch of tariffs, but like they're doing with Canada. But how long can that go on? That's the question. There's wanting U.S. soybeans or not wanting them versus we need U.S. soybeans. And obviously, South America has been very much a preferred supplier. The story on AgWeb continues. Even with Washington and Beijing extending a tariff truce for 90 days earlier this month, China hasn't officially purchased a single bushel of new crop U.S. soybeans, something the U.S. hasn't seen since 2010. It's 15 years ago. Similar to the previous trade war, it seems farmers are on the edge of the spear when it comes to the impact, with soybean prices sliding to levels well below break even. With basis crashing, North Dakota seems to be hit especially hard. Just how low are prices. So in Matic, North Dakota, basis is negative 165 with cash beans sitting at 883 on Tuesday. In Carrington, North Dakota, basis is negative 145, which brings the price down to 903 cash. At those levels, farmers are looking at losing even more equity this year. The American Soybean Association sent a letter to President Trump late last week, warning of dire long-term economic outcomes for farmers if the country continues to not buy U.S. soybeans. We have reached out to the ASA to talk to a representative about what's going on here and what they think needs to happen for change. Obviously, having China buy some beans would be ideal. I think it just, as we heard from John Newton earlier on today's show, I just think all it does is increase the probability that we see ad hoc programming for the U.S. farmer, especially in the Midwest, when it comes to, hey, you're taking the brunt of this, the tip of the spear, so to speak, and we're going to backfill some of that. Could they be 100% backfilled? Absolutely not. The losses are too big in some of the crops, but I guess every little bit helps. We'll see what happens. If you have been listening to some of the more conservative media out there, even probably on the left, this has been talked about. This whole controversy about Cracker Barrel changing their logo. Wow. Big. This is like, I didn't think we were short on stories, but apparently we're short on stories. So they have reversed their decision. Cracker Barrel said it is reverting to its old-timer logo after a rebrand ignited a culture war. The company said on Tuesday, we said we would listen, and we have. Our new logo is going away, and our old-timer will remain. Cracker Barrel's shares rose more than 3% in early trading on Wednesday. The restaurant company's announcement on Tuesday evening came just after it apologized for how it had communicated changes, but said it was keeping its streamlined new look. Apparently not. The chain had replaced a logo that they had since 1977, which included a man in overalls leaning against a barrel under Herschel, with a version featuring just its name. After the new logo was unveiled last week, some customers and online commentators said Cracker Barrel was abandoning its tradition and heritage in favor of a more sterile look. Even President Trump had weighed in on the rebranding, saying Tuesday morning that Cracker Barrel should revert to its old logo based on response from customers. They got $1 billion worth of free publicity if they play their cards right. Very tricky to do, but a great opportunity. Posted on social media. I think that was on True Social. On Tuesday evening, Trump congratulated the company on changing back its logo. Who knew? People are so passionate about a logo over there at Cracker Barrel. Okay, want to remind everybody that tomorrow is the Farmer Rapid Fire. We'll talk to farmers across the country, brought to you by Pioneer Seeds Canada. And Friday, of course, will be our RealAg Issues panel. Tyler McCann of Cappy, Lindsay Smith, myself, and Kelvin Hepner will be around to discuss all the top issues of the week. Okay, thank you so much for joining us here today, and I really appreciate you joining us for the bonus round and doing the news. And we'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.